Welcome to Clubby. Hi, I'm Rick Brimacombe of Brimacombe and Associates. I am your architect of business growth. Today, we're going to be discussing wealth management considerations for the business owner. I want to thank our sponsors, Irish Titan, an e-commerce and web development firm, Boulay Group, CPAs and advisors, Highland Bank, a locally owned community bank, Romaine Berg, a digital marketing agency, Minnesota Sales, a sales acceleration firm, and the Network Connect, a catalytic gateway for growing your company. I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Joe Bloodgood. Joe is a certified financial planner and partner at Boulay. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, Rick. It's great to be with you.
Well, thanks for joining us. And for those of you who'd like to reach out to Joe, his contact info is jbloodgood@boulaygroup.com. Again, jbloodgood@boulaygroup.com. Anybody who has questions on the video, you can add those comments and we will get to you as soon as we can. All right, Joe, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, the firm, and the various things that you're working on.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. So as you mentioned before, I'm a partner at Boulay. I work exclusively in our wealth management area, and we really work with clients sort of through the varying degrees of the life cycle. So many of our clients are either business owners or high net worth families, but really our focus is on helping them build and maintain their wealth and seeing to it that their intents are carried out throughout their lifetime.
Great. And then you got a little side hustle going on right now, which is your three children, grade school age. They are at home. So you're doing homeschooling. You're trying to keep them occupied with sports and their music. Tell us a little bit about that.
Rick, it's day to day. I'll tell you what. It's a new social experiment in our house, as it is at many others, I'm sure. We've got three school age kids. They're active. They're in music. They're in sports, and they're still in class. I realized very quickly they're teaching math differently than they used to.
All right. And are you, given your background in the financial services industry, are you able to keep up with them on their math, or are they left you behind?
Well, we're doing the best we can.
All right. Say, getting to the topic today, as a business owner, what are my lines of defense given the current situation and all that's going on?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rick. And, I think it's helpful to start with the basics when it comes to lines of defense. We encourage all of our clients to make sure they maintain an emergency fund in something like cash or cash equivalents. And really, depending on the situation, it could be anywhere from three months to a year's worth of expenses in cash. That's really the first line of defense. A lot of times people have an emergency fund and they don't touch it, and they don't ever anticipate touching it. But if you do find yourself in a tough spot, you're glad you have it, and now might be that time. If we think about it broader than that, another thing that's a great line of defense for folks is a home equity line of credit or a HELOC. That's one of those tools in the toolbox that is best applied for when you don't need it. We'd encourage people to seek those out during calm times when you're not anticipate using it. Generally, the banks are more amenable to doing it at that point as well. But it can be a nice backstop if you do need it. And then just a couple of other things I would mention. Most of our clients are going to have 5 to 7 years worth of living expenses in bonds or fixed income inside their portfolio. And now we've seen it illustrated over the last couple of months. Stocks have been very, very volatile since the beginning of the year. But most portfolios have that ballast inside of it that's been more stable. And now would be the time where if you did have to sell securities, bonds could be a place to go because likely they've held up better than stocks have. And then if you're beyond that, there's some other more creative things we can do with retirement accounts and short-term loans. But I think that's kind of a good first step.
Okay, first, somebody who's not as versed in that area, such as myself and maybe some of our listeners, talk a little bit about, are there any changes with the laws given all that's going on regarding taking loans and retirement accounts?
Yeah, there have been some loans, and I would just caveat it with those new provisions are going to be up to each individual, say for example, 401k plan to either allow for it or not. So if you're part of a workplace plan, it's possible that your employer has decided to adopt some of the provisions within the CARES Act. And kind of at the most basic level, it enhances your loan taking capability. It takes it all the way to $100,000. There's also some ability to take it as a COVID related hardship distribution. And that's also up to $100,000. And there's some flexible payment options compared to what they used to be as well. So some additional flexibility.
Yeah, that's great in a situation like we find ourselves in now. So that's a good tip. Thanks for sharing that. As a business owner, and I'm thinking about my portfolio, what kind of management things, what I might consider, and what different ways might I handle my portfolio right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is actually an ideal time for many people to take proactive steps to sort of lean into the situation and hopefully come out better on the other side. It's where a plan is important. So if you had a plan in place, hopefully that plan addressed a situation like this when we are going through some uncertainty. But I think, a couple things I would point out that can be easily accomplished that can pay bigger dividends later on. The first would be just simply rebalancing your account. To give you a really basic example, let's say you were a balanced investor and you had 50% of your investments in stocks and you had 50% of your investments in bonds. Over what's happened in the market over the last couple of months, maybe now you have 60% in bonds and 40% in stocks because the stocks have declined in value. One of the easiest things there to do is simply sell off some of those excess positions in fixed income and buy into stocks where we've seen a decline in the value, with the idea we're buying up more shares and hopefully we'll benefit from the long-term appreciation of those securities. So that's one way that you can take a proactive step and hopefully put yourself in a better position. Beyond rebalancing, there's a couple of other things that we always encourage with our clients. One is, what we call asset location. In other words, what types of accounts are your money in? And there's really three basic types. There's a taxable account, like a brokerage account, that's taxed every year. There's a 401k or an IRA account, and that's considered a tax deferred account. So dollars went in there before tax, they're growing tax deferred, and they'll be ordinary income someday when you take them out. And then there's a tax-free account like a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k. One of the little tactical things that we can accomplish is by strategically putting different types of investments in those accounts based on how they're taxed. So an easy example is, for example, your bonds are going to, the interest on those bonds is going to be treated as ordinary income. IRAs and 401k plans are a great place to put those because you can defer that ordinary income, which is typically a higher rate than your capital gains. Your highest, the investments that you think have the highest likelihood of appreciation, and the market will kind of dictate that. But let's say we decide that it's small company stocks. You could put small company stocks into a tax-free account like a Roth IRA because the tax bill's already been paid, right? So any value you gain over the course of your life within that account is going to be tax-free dollars. And so there's some little things we can do with where we put your assets that can make a big impact later on as well. And then the final thing I would add is, we characterize it as asset migration. In other words, can we move money to a more advantageous place for you? One of the easiest things that can be done there is taking pre-tax assets and moving them into tax-free assets. So taking an IRA and changing it into a Roth IRA. And why it might make sense for folks this year is just if we do continue to see a downturn in the stock market, you can take an asset that's lost some of its value, transfer it into a tax-free account. You'll pick up the transfer as ordinary income, but however, if it's 20 or 25% less than it was, you transfer it and let it appreciate in the future. Now you're better off and you're tax-free going forward. So those are three things that we're thinking about right now, Rick.
Okay, and then as I was kind of tracking you there, again, a reminder for the audience, first one was rebalancing. Second one was what's called your asset location. And then the
Yep,
third one was migrating assets.
you got it.
Okay, great. Well, I was trying to take notes, so you did a good job.
Nice work.
So what about debt? A lot of different things. People have different opinions. As a business owner, how should I be thinking about debt right now?
It's on the mind of a lot of our business owner clients, and I think just at the most basic level, from an interest rate standpoint, we're in a really good spot for those of us who are borrowing money. So if you think about your debt and you put it in two categories, whether it's good or bad debt, I think you're gonna for good debt you're looking for low rates, competitive rates, longer terms, which are going to allow you to pay it back over a longer period of time, and then debt that fits within your budget and that also helps you grow your business. On the other side of the equation, if you're thinking about bad debt, some of it's pretty obvious, but higher rates and shorter terms, less friendly terms. So I think the big thing there is as we think about looking at our budget and ways we can help that, can we consolidate some of that debt? Can we get some of the debt that's in the bad category over to the good category? And then just being mindful about how we use debt going forward, I think is another big consideration.
And that's obviously all stuff that you work with your clients on and help them go through, especially when there's just a lot of noise and turmoil with what's going on. I'm sure it's good that you help folks with that.
Yeah, absolutely. We get questions about that all the time.
All right. And then what about as I'm kind of as a business owner looking forward and thinking about the future, what are some estate planning strategies? And are they any different now than maybe they were 6 months ago? Or as you look forward, how might they be different?
Yeah. So that's always it's always interesting to look forward. People always have opinions on how things might look going forward. But we feel strongly that right now could be a really opportune time to do estate planning. Markets are off their highs. Interest rates are at all-time lows. Tax rates are at lows. The estate exemptions are as high as they've ever been. And, when we think about things like those estate exemptions and interest rates and tax rates, while we don't know what they're going to be in the future, they'll likely be different and they certainly could be higher. And so it makes the goal of getting assets out of one's estate, from a tax standpoint, it can be really powerful. So a couple things that we're thinking about right now and helping our clients through is one, at the most basic level, it can be a really good time to do large taxable gifts. So an individual and a spouse have a lifetime exemption of either a little over 11 million or twice that for a married couple. So over $22 million over their lifetime. That gives people a large amount of a large bucket of assets that they could possibly move. Some strategies there might be giving away or gifting depreciated assets, kind of going back to our asset migration conversation earlier. To be able to give an asset that maybe is 25% off of its high can make a lot of sense for the estate planning for much of the same reason. A couple of other things that could make sense right now. An individual and a spouse have an annual exclusion that they can give away that does not affect their lifetime exclusion. So if my wife and I wanted to gift money to our children, I could give $15,000. My wife could give $15,000 for a total of $30,000 to each child. And so if you think about that, a lot of times for grandparents who have multiple grandchildren, that becomes a pretty big impact if you think about $30,000 times a number of individuals. A few other things that we're thinking about that we're seeing with our clients. 529 plans are educational planning tools many people would be aware of, and they allow for that $15,000 annual exclusion. You can do 5 years worth of that. So If there's, for example, grandparents that want to fund education for grandchildren, if it's a husband and a wife, they could give $30,000 times five, $150,000 to little Johnny or little Susie's 529 plan for college. So that can be a big impact as well. The final thing I would mention is there's for those that are charitably inclined, there's something called a donor advised fund. And the donor advised fund is really a vehicle for an individual to gift assets to. It can be cash or securities or a variety of other things, and then have the ability and the discretion to give those assets to a charity of their choice over the time frame of their choice. The benefit is you can get the deduction for the contribution to the donor advised fund all at one time. So for example, if somebody is charitably inclined, they could give 3 or 4 years worth of charitable gifts and get the deduction all in 1 year, and then take their time donating those assets out over a longer period of time.
Yeah, that's an opportunity for folks that I don't think is as well known or as well utilized. How often do you see people use that, and then how do you incorporate that into your planning?
Yeah, Rick, they've really become more popular just in the last couple of years for folks who are in tune with their taxes. The standard deduction for a married couple going to $24,000 a year. We saw a lot of folks who maybe itemized their taxes in the past, now taking that standard deduction, right? And one way to influence that is charitable gifts. In other words, to be able to itemize, to give larger charitable gifts will give you a larger deduction. And so a lot of folks started doing that, where they'd give 2 or 3 or 4 years worth of charity 1 year, kind of bunch it into the year, and then take a year or two off. However, they're in control of that donor advised fund, which allows them to sort of give at the same pace to the charities of their choice throughout that time.
Sure. And then this year would be a great time to do that, given the challenges in the economy. I'm sure a lot of charities are going to be needing a little extra this year. And so that's a great idea for this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of a win-win, because for folks who already have a donor advised fund, those donations from it are not cash out of their pocket. They're already in that donor advised fund. And to your point, charities that are feeling the pinch right now are the beneficiaries of that.
Okay. So as we kind of think about our topic here today and what we want to accomplish, any other kind of closing thoughts or things maybe you didn't cover, or other stuff that maybe you want to dive into a little bit more?
I would say, it really starts with a plan. So I would encourage folks not to wing it. Financial plan, to have a financial plan, you don't necessarily need to have an overly complex financial situation, but we find a little bit of planning goes a long way. And what it allows you to do is to sort of pre-make some of those decisions when the seas are calm, so that when things do get a little rough or a little bit rocky, you can do that with sort of emotion on the sideline. And I think that's really helpful for folks.
Okay. And then I'm imagining there was a lot of hand holding and just trying to keep people calm with all the turmoil we've been seeing.
Yeah, there certainly was. I think if anything, going through a situation like we've been through, it brings focus to it. So even if maybe people who weren't paying as close of attention to their finances, now they're in tune with them. I think the benefit going back, though, is I think most of our clients, when they find that they have a good financial plan, and we've sort of coached them through. We didn't predict COVID, but we could predict that there are going to be times that feel uneasy and that feel unique. And so some of that planning, I think, really paid off as we've gone through this.
Yeah, well, certainly, as you mentioned, the balanced portfolios and the having living expenses for an extended period of time, great strategy. So thanks for sharing those with us, Joe. So to close, how about if we get a little philosophical here? If you were to kind of think through your life and your career, What is something that you wish you knew some number of years ago? It could be a personal thing, a business thing, whatever you'd like to share with our audience.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing that comes to my mind, Rick, is that as I think about my career, as important as technical skills are and the ability to navigate complex situations, I think just as important are the relationships that we have. And if I could tell my younger self something, it would be to make sure I'm devoting an equal amount of time into my relationships as I am into my technical aptitude.
All right. And then again, Joe, remind everybody how they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So boulegroup.com is the website. My email is jbloodgood@boulegroup.com. And my phone number is 952-893-3805.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Joe. I really appreciate it. You've shared a lot of good tips here, and look forward to having you back. And again, thank you very much.
Thanks, Rick. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.